Ihihiyama. My name is Thomas Modo, and in this video, I'll be explaining the basic elements of learning Igbo. In this video, we'll have 5 different sections: sentence structure, pronoun, vowel harmony, verb conjugations, and accents. First, let's start off with sentence structure. In Igbo, we use a subject, verb, object, or an SVO sentence structure. But what exactly does this mean? Well, basically, what it means is that when we make sentences in Igbo, we start with the subject, state the action that the subject is completing, and then state the object that the action is directed towards. So, for example, if Adana is eating food, how do we translate that in Igbo? Well, we already know that Adana is the subject of our sentence, and that our verb is her eating food, and that the object is that she's eating the food. So, when we translate that, Adana stays the same because it's her name. Naeri becomes our verb, and Ri is food in Igbo. So, using what we know and putting it into our formula, our sentence becomes Adana Naeri Ri. So now, let's talk a little bit about pronouns. But what exactly is a pronoun? A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun or phrase to avoid repetition in a sentence. We use a lot of different pronouns in English, like he, she, they, it, them, us, and you all. But in Igbo, we use pronouns just a little bit differently. But how specifically? Well, Igbo pronouns aren't identified by gender, but instead based on the function or the person or people being referred to. So let me show you a list of some of the single subject pronouns that you will use in your common everyday life. Like I and you. I translates to am or mu. So if I were to say I am going, it translates to munaga. Similarly, you translates to gi. So if I'm saying you are eating food, then we translate that to gi na eri nri. And we have he, she, or it that translates to ya. So if you say it came, your translation would be ya biara. Here are some of the plural subject pronouns that we have. We have we, which translates to ani. So if I were to say, we saw you, then that translates to ani hurigi. If we were saying you as in you all, or you in the formal sense, we say unu. So if you were to say you are all playing, it translates to unu nile egu na egu. Similarly, if we translate they, that translates to ha. So if I say they want water, then that translates to hachoronu. Now, let's move on to verb harmony and pertains to the last step. These can also be known as phonological harmonies, where a vowel repeats itself at the beginning or end of it. Let's go over some examples. The 3 examples we have here are to go, which is iga, to write, which is ide, or to run, which is bauso. When harmonizing iba, we repeat the a at the end and change the b to a g, making it aga. When harmonizing ide, we change the d to a g, and we change the I at the beginning to an E, making it ege. And with Iqbal So, we change the I at the beginning of Akba to an A, and we leave the second part, making it Akbal So. But you notice that some of these words harmonize differently. So why exactly do they do that? Well, this is because there are 2 ways to harmonize our verbs in Igbo. We categorize them using light vowels and heavy vowels. Light vowels are a, e, u, and u, while heavy vowels are e, I, o, and u. Depending on which vowel is at the end, if the vowel is light, then we replace the infinitive I at the beginning of the verb with an A. And if the vowel is heavy, we replace that same infinitive I with an E instead. But do note that this isn't always the case, and there are some verbs that change differently. There are also other parts of verbs that can be subject to change. So it's best to ask questions for verbs that you may not know how to harmonize. Now let's move on to verb conjugation. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed that when I was talking about pronouns, you may have noticed that some of the verbs changed, that some of the ways I wrote verb changed a bit when we changed different tenses. This is because when we make sentences in Igbo, we need to consider a lot of things, and one of the most important things that we need to consider are verbs. We especially need to consider how we conjugate these verbs and making sure that we conjugate them properly. Conjugating a verb is when we change the verb's form to match the current situation or time that the action was completed in. This can be very important and very crucial, because if we don't conjugate our verb, our sentences will only work in one dimension, making it hard to communicate with other people. So let's start off with the present continuous tense. These are actions or things that are currently happening, like if I'm running or swimming. When talking in this tense, we use the formula our subject, na, and then our harmonized verb root. So if I were to say, I am going, how do we translate it? Well, we already know that our subject is I, which translates to which you know from our pronoun section. We know that na will be there in the center, regardless of what the sentence is, and we know that going translates to aga. So now, using our formula, our sentence becomes munaga. I want to go over two other tenses really quickly. Simple past, something that has already been done, and future tense, when something will eventually happen. In simple past, using the same sentence from before, we remove the na and replace the R in the middle of aga we replace the G in the middle of aga to an R, making it ara. So our translation becomes muera. And in future tense, we use the same sentence structure as simple continuous, but instead of using na, we use ga. So when we translate in future tense, we say naga, ga aga. Last but not least, let's talk about accent, or letter sounds, as I may have labeled them before, as other people may label. In Igbo, we have three different kinds of accents. We can have a high accent, which makes an excited sound, a low accent, which makes a calm sound, and a downstep that makes the normal sound of the letter. These can be pretty important. For example, we can use aqua, which has three different meanings depending on which accents that you use to say. Saying aqua, that translates to cloth. Saying aqua, that translates to egg. And saying aqua, that translates to bed, or to cry. But as you can tell, there's a lot of jumble, and these sounds are very hard to differentiate. And that may be a lot to consider, but there is a simple line. Do know that these are very important, but not as important when speaking. It all relies on the context of the sentence. But you may be wondering what context is. Well, context is the type of setting of which an action occurs in. For example, If I'm in a restaurant and I say, achoro iriakwa, it can mean I want to cry or I want to sleep, but the people working at that restaurant will probably be able to depict that you're talking about food, understanding that you're saying that you want to eat egg. And if you were to use eze in a sentence, which can mean king or teeth, you're talking about famous people, and you say Niki ahu pu eze, they'll probably be able to connect that you're talking about a king and not your teeth. In simple, don't stress over these kinds of things because these accents are more important when it comes to writing than it is speaking. So in conversation, you won't have to worry as much about using the correct sound. Now, I am wrapping up this video, but do note that it doesn't end here. You can still practice with your family at home, and you can ask questions, and you can always research and ask questions. There are also a lot of resources online, such as classes that you can take to better familiarize yourself and improve your skills. Ka'odi, stay sharp, stay fresh. This is Thomas signing out.